What is the hardest castle boss from every Mega Man X game? Starting off with good old classic Mega Man X1, we have 3 castle bosses to go over because first of all, I don't think the Vile fight counts as a castle boss. I mean, maybe it does, but it feels more like a mid-boss since it's not at the end of one of the stages, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Either way, I'm not going to be counting Vile, but even if I did, he would not be the hardest. I'm also not going to be counting Sigma in this video because I feel like that wouldn't be fair to a lot of the games, so if you want to see a Sigma-centered video, please let me know down in the comments and we can do that sometime soon. But for now, let's deal with the classic Rangda Bangda. First of all, as much as I love the look of this guy, it's a very freaky looking boss. I mean, it's staring at you the entire time you try to fight this boss, which is an obstacle in itself. But that aside, it's not the hardest fight in the world, especially if you use the weakness. But even if you don't use the weakness, it has a pretty easy pattern to learn and it doesn't do too much damage, so all things considered, it's pretty easy. The only thing to really worry about is that cheap shot whenever the little flying capsule thing shows up, because insta-kill spikes show up from the ground, and I can definitely see that thing messing up a few new players since they probably aren't expecting something like that, but as long as you're ready for it, Rangda Bangda is not too hard at all. Plus, it's a fun name to say, Rangda Bangda. Come on, how is that not fun to say? Guys, say that at home. If you're watching this at home right now, say Rangda Bangda. Come on, say it with me. Rangda Okay, I'm not gonna say it anymore. The weird dinosaur mouth on wheels thing may be one of the easiest castle bosses of all time. It can be annoying to get constantly rammed into over and over, but in general, I feel like it's just super easy to dodge even if you don't know the pattern, and very easy to take down quickly even without the weakness. But I will say, the weakness is weird. I got made fun of in my Mega Man X No Dash run because I forgot his weakness, but I mean, his weakness is Boomer Kawanger's Boomerang? That doesn't make any sense for this boss, so leave me alone! Anyway, this guy is really easy. The hardest castle boss from this game, on the other hand, has got to be the spider thing. Keeping up with the trail that it falls down can be pretty difficult and frustrating, especially as he gets faster towards the end of the fight. Maybe it's just me. I mean, I do need glasses and refuse to buy them, but I very easily mix up the lines and think he's going one way only to get squished by a spider, which is ridiculous. It should be the other way around. This thing also drops baby spiders on top of you, which is hard to deal with both in terms of gameplay and psychologically. I hate spiders in real life, so that's probably what's causing the majority of the issues here, but honestly, all things considered, this boss is not the worst thing in the world. But I do have to say it is the hardest castle boss from Mega Man X1. Mega Man X2, on the other hand, has some much more iconic castle bosses, surprisingly, which is weird considering how much more iconic Mega Man X1 is as a game, but anyway, let's address the elephant in the room. The best fight, and what should be the hardest fight from this game, is Zero. I love fighting Zero. This is one of my favorite parts of the entire game. The fight is fun, the music is awesome, and it's super cool even story-wise, so it's a shame that the fight is actually pretty easy. And I don't mean in the way where I'm normally like, oh yeah, everything in Mega Man is super easy, especially if you're subscribed, which is true. But this fight specifically is too easy. You do have to fight Sigma immediately after, so I guess it does make sense, but I just wish the fight was harder, so needless to say, this is not the hardest castle boss. Violin is also a very hard fight if you don't know the cheese, but if you do know the cheese, well, you can cheese it pretty easily. You can basically just stand right in front of him and charge up Bubble Crab's weapons and kill him pretty much without any issue. As a kid, this may have been the hardest fight, but once you know what to do, it's weirdly easy. The weird morphed agile fight is also easy, especially if you have the Shoryuken, but I'm basically assuming you aren't going to be using that for any of these fights. But this guy was specifically designed for the Shoryuken, and you cannot convince me otherwise. I mean, he's right above you in the stage where you get the Shoryuken, right where the Shoryuken would land. He is glorified target practice. But even without that, he's still very easy to kill with magnet mines, especially if you're good at Tetris and can dodge his slow attacks. So he's not going to be the hardest either. Which only leaves the old man, and if you've ever played this game, then you know why he is going to be the hardest. I mean, what is there to even say? There are spikes all over the ground, his hitbox is weird, and he basically has 2 phases. Plus, even if you do have the Shoryuken, it doesn't even make things much easier. Now, sure, there are ways to cheese the first part of his boss fight, which I've shown off in other videos, but that doesn't make this fight as a whole not hard. In fact, I'd probably call this the hardest part of Mega Man X2, but I guess that is debatable. Either way, this crazy old man is definitely the hardest castle boss from Mega Man X2. Mega Man X3 has some very weird castle bosses, and you can't even play against all of them in one single playthrough due to weird story reasons, so there's a chance you haven't even seen all of these guys. Unless you're subscribed, of course, in which case I'm sure you know everything about this game. Let's go ahead and get the easy guys out of the way though. Vile once again makes his way into a Sigma castle, but this time he was upgraded to a castle boss. Unfortunately though, he still isn't very hard, so Vile will not be getting any spotlight today. The weird presser acid shooting enemy also isn't that hard. I mean, he's hard to look at, I guess, because he's pretty ugly with a weird elephant truck, but the boss himself is not that bad. But again, it is weird, so I will say you might need to get used to the pattern and everything. The underwater squid boss thing is very cool, and I like the concept for this boss, but once again, this guy is not very difficult either. It seems like Mega Man X3 saved all the difficulty in the Sigma Castle for Sigma himself, but again, we can talk about that in another video if you guys really want to see it. Anyway, we do actually get to see some difficulty once we run into the old man, and no, this is not the same old man from Mega Man X2. This fight isn't too hard, luckily, but the fact that he can put up a shield to heal himself really throws me off every now and then. Now, of course, once you get the timing down, it's not an issue anymore, but it's very easy to zone out and shoot his barrier, accidentally healing half of his health bar, and that's not fun. But there is a castle boss much harder than this guy, being God Car Machine Oinari. Now, first of all, that name is just straight up hard to say, and it reflects in the gameplay perfectly. This fight is by no means impossible or super frustrating or anything, but it's certainly tricky to dodge everything, and if you don't dodge everything, you'll probably die because this guy does a good bit of damage. So yeah, I think this fight kind of speaks for itself. So God Car Machine Oinari is the hardest boss from Mega Man X3. Mega Man X4 only has like 3.5 castle bosses, so this should be a pretty short entry. First of all, we have the Colonel, and I don't even know if he really counts, but you do have to fight him at the end of the first quote-unquote castle stage, or whatever you want to call it, so I am going to count him as a castle boss. But he's pretty easy, like the easiest one for sure. Next up, depending on who you play as, you either have Iris or Double, and both of these guys are actually pretty tricky. I think Iris is a little bit easier than Double, but neither one of these fights are easy, especially the first time you play. And honestly, they're pretty close in difficulty, so if you aren't comfortable with Zero's moveset, you might actually find finding Double easier, and I wouldn't blame you for that. But I do think the hardest boss has got to be the General. This was a hard decision to make though, because honestly, the General, Double, and Iris are all the same tiers of difficulty, at least to me, so depending on when I play this game, there's a decent chance I have more trouble with one of these guys than the other. That being said, overall, I do think the General is a little bit harder because he's kinda awkward to fight against considering how big he is, and that's also a little bit intimidating. So congratulations, General. I guess you are the hardest castle boss from Mega Man X4. Moving on from the first half of the worst castle bosses, I can already tell some of you guys are going to be upset that I'm not including Sigma in this video, especially after that Mega Man X3 segment, but if this video gets 500 likes, and I'll make a Sigma-centered video. I'll do a video ranking Sigma from hardest to easiest, or easiest to hardest, from best to worst, etc. And if you're lucky, I'll even do from ugliest to most beautiful. If you're lucky. Mega Man X5 is one of my least favorite Mega Man X games, but I've got to say, the fight you have with Zero or Mega Man X is super cool. I love this battle from both sides for a lot of the same reasons that I love the Zero fight in Mega Man X2, but once again, it suffers from being a bit too easy. If you aren't using tricks like SDC with Zero, I'd say this fight is maybe slightly harder than the one from Mega Man X2, but it's still not really a challenge fight, which is a shame considering this is literally X versus Zero. That does not make it not cool though. In fact, it is a super cool fight and probably my favorite part of Mega Man X5. Rangda Bangda also makes a triumphant return in this game, which I do appreciate, and while his fight is debatably harder than the X vs Zero fight from either side, is still not incredibly difficult. As a matter of fact, I'd go as far as to call this fight still easy. Not too easy to the point where it's boring or anything, but the hardest part about this fight is the first second or two where you see that giant health bar fill up, and you think to yourself, gosh, this is gonna be hard, but then it's actually not hard. So yeah, Rangda Bangda Part 2 is not the hardest castle boss. That honor would of course have to go to the Shadow Devil. Now, I am pretty famous for saying that the devil bosses are easy, at least in the classic series, but the Shadow Devil is far from that. Just like the other devil bosses, I will say it's not impossible once you get the pattern memorized, and it's not that bad, but it's certainly annoying and takes forever. On top of the fight being a long battle of stamina and willpower, his attacks do a ton of damage to you, and you even take damage for touching the weird green hologram line that it leaves behind. I don't like that. If that weird green line didn't do any damage, then I'd say this is a pretty well-designed fight in terms of both gameplay and difficulty, but that's where I draw the line. The weird green hologram line, that is. So I'm officially going to declare the Shadow Devil as the hardest castle boss from Mega Man X5. Mega Man X6 is the first game so far that is utterly filled with difficult castle bosses. Literally every castle boss in this game is horrible and awful to deal with. Hymax is impossible. No one has ever beaten him ever. He has these giant shields up constantly. He only takes damage when you stun him, and even then, he's immune to everything. He does 1,000,000 damage to you every single hit, and if you break his shield, he goes bananas and kills you. Tast has never even beaten High Max, and I hate this boss fight. Gate is even stupider though. He is invincible to everything except for his own balls blowing up in his face. Not only is that stupid and horrible, but this boss fight is also hard because he does 1,000,000 damage and those same balls do a ton of damage to you, so of course they do damage to him when they blow up in his face. I will say, High Max is harder than Gate, but neither of these guys are as hard as the Nightmare Mother. That's right folks, we have another devil boss making it into the finals. Who could have ever imagined this coming? Now before I start complaining about this thing, I could totally understand anyone who thinks High Max is harder because frankly, High Max is impossible, and I almost chose him for this entry. But every time I see the Nightmare Mother boss, I remember why everybody hates Mega Man X6. I do not hate Mega Man X6, I actually really enjoy this game. But when I see the Nightmare Mother, the souls of every human being who has ever hated Mega Man X6 all telepathically share their pain with me, and I can understand them, even if only for a split second. And because of that and nothing else, Nightmare Mother is the hardest castle boss from Mega Man X6. But High Max is awful too, I hate that guy. Mega Man X7 only has 2 castle bosses, and one of them is red. Not the color, his name is red. I know it's stupid. This guy is kind of lame to me, and his boss fight is annoying. It's hard the first time, I guess, but it's really just hard in a boring way because if you're patient with this guy, then everything goes smoothly. But if you are impatient like myself, then you might rush things and mess something up. But all in all, this fight isn't really difficult as much as it is boring and a little bit annoying. The hardest boss fight from this game is that stupid giant crusher enemy from the first Sigma stage. And I know what you're probably thinking, Tooterp, how could this possibly be harder than red? This is like a 20-second fight at most. But I'm not talking about just the stupid boss fight. The entire stage is a 7-minute long auto-scroller where you slowly avoid this thing. And one small mistake makes you restart either the entire stage or at least the second half of it. This is my least favorite level maybe in all of Mega Man because of this horrible enemy forcing you to be in an auto-scroller. And yes, I called this castle boss an enemy because that's what he feels like. When you actually have to fight this guy, he dies easily. It's a piece of cake. But actually having the patience to play Mega Man X7 up to this point, especially this entire level, may be the hardest thing in the entirety of the Mega Man franchise. So frick you, you awful crusher castle boss enemy thing. You are the hardest castle boss from Mega Man X7. Alright guys, so am I crazy or does Mega Man X8 only have one castle boss other than Sigma, being Vile? I mean, there's obviously Lumine, but I don't think that counts. There's also Copy Sigma, but like that's still Sigma, right? Even if that wasn't Sigma, that fight still isn't really that hard, so I guess Vile finally does get his time in the limelight by default. The best way to get your time in the limelight, I suppose. I will say, this fight is at least pretty stupid and annoying, especially when he does that 30-minute long attack where he's just invincible and shooting electricity everywhere. That's not fun. In fact, I'd say that part is pretty hard to deal with, so yeah, even though this is by default, Vile appropriately wins the award for being the hardest castle boss from Mega Man X8. Those were the hardest castle bosses from every Mega Man X game. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed because next time we'll probably do a video on the easiest and maybe after that the best and the worst because that seems to be a pattern on this channel. I don't know, I just like to cover my bases when it comes to those kind of things, so yeah, I hope you enjoy, and while I work on those, maybe I can work on a super secret high quality video in the background. Oh wait, I wasn't supposed to say that to you guys. Pretend you didn't hear that.